All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my presentation and webinar about measuring what matters. It's metrics for product managers. I'll quickly start by telling you what this is not and then what this is. I'm focused on trying to help everyone think about how to pick product metrics that are useful, meaningful, and hopefully help you be a better product manager in your day-to-day life. This is not about how to measure ads or how to get into Google or other aspects that I probably have some experience in, but I don't think that's the focus of this talk. So just so you know, and make good use of your time. What I'll tell you to start with is metrics is not about absolving you of understanding users. You can't optimize metrics and become successful alone. And it doesn't give you ideas. It gives you decision-making frameworks and ways to think about problems. And I'll repeat, metrics does not solve your problem of understanding your users. And after this, we'll dive into the actual presentations. Some quick background about me, and I love my little meme on the corner because it reminds me of the fact that these are often quite boring when people describe this perfect arc of how they ended up being the successful person in the career where they are. And I would say, it's more happenstance, a lot of the choices I made. I did engineering out of college, worked in consulting for a few years at Charles River Associates, meandered my way into a beverage startup and was helping in various business roles, trying to build small brands for Coca Cola, ending with helping bring Mexican Coke to America. Then I ended up at Google, where I've spent some time in general management, in strategy, and then in product management, which obviously makes sense for this audience. Important things to just think about for a minute for everyone is that the running theme throughout all of this and why metrics is something that's very close to me is that it's all about using data and insights to guide decision making and then influencing both business leaders, engineering leaders, sales leaders about how to make better decisions using data. The other thing that's pretty useful to think about is that I perhaps should have done some better lessons or classes, but I don't have any prior experience in a very structured way in most of the jobs I've ever had. And so quite often I've had to learn along and go along the process and pick up some skills on the way. And I find that learning from people who've done the same thing as me, who haven't actually got the formal experience in taking a course in a topic that they work in, actually teaches me a lot because people who've learned on the job can share and guide you a lot more than people who've done it since they're a kid or who've been brought up in that discipline. So let's get started on what do we mean by measurement. And I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the dashboard on the left. I'm guilty of having done this in the past. When I was in consulting, we sometimes would just listen to the client's needs sometimes and just give them what they're asking for, even if it wasn't helpful, which was a giant dashboard with all the data and insights that could guide everything you ever do. What I'm going to talk about today is more about how do you make this feedback loop where you define goals, make them measurable, then actually collect the metrics and make them trackable and useful, and then use them to guide insights that may actually correct your vision of your goals, change what you're doing, and end up building measurable, trackable process metrics. Now, how does this all work? Let's start with, you have to ask yourself the question, what is your business or user goal? Then we'll have to then come from there to understand what is the outcome or North Star metric that really matters. And then from there, you move towards your proxy metrics. And what can you measure every day, every week, every month? And then this is the hardest question, is how do you actually make this actionable? If you build metrics just for your VP or your exec and then don't ever use them except every once in a quarter, you're doing yourself and them a disservice. So how do you convert metrics to being something that are meaningful for you? So the first question, and I think this is really, really the hardest question, is what's the why? And everyone will answer you that their product is growing users, growing money, growing satisfaction. And it seems like, of course, we know what the goal of every business is. But really, there's a lot more. More specifically, sometimes you might need to articulate and understand. Users might want to just go home early. They're trying to achieve a task and they want to be done with it and go home and go have fun playing tennis. Their why is not improve their task management process. Their why is going home. They might be trying to grow customer or users' lifetime value. People might be seeking safety or stability, and your product or your service is actually guiding them towards that. Sometimes your user is trying to develop leadership, boost personal or team ego. It's not that easy to articulate, but sometimes, advocacy or loyal fans of your product or brand are very important. And finally, I would say, at the end of the day, sometimes it's a bonus, right? People do want to gain money, but it's not just money in the way you think about it. It might be that that individual who you're selling to or talking to wants to generate more income. And you have to think about what that means. So articulating this, and there's a famous sort of interrogative technique in Socratic learning about 5 whys you ask yourself, and you ask yourself why until you get to an uncomfortable question that you can't really answer, and you have to think a lot about why you're doing something. And this, I think, is something a lot of businesses spend less time on because they start jumping through the metrics hoops without articulating a meaningful why and then thinking about how to measure it. So I think this is something that I would say just think about, and we can talk through some realistic examples of this in a minute, but this is something that's very valuable. Now, the next follow-up question is, of course, can you then take your why and convert it to an outcome metric? Identifying a North Star metric seems very simple, right? Like if you are at Google, you're like, well, we want to improve search quality results. Like that's easy, get better results. But it's not that simple, right? I think there might be authoritative sources, like if you think about the history of Google and Yahoo and how like Yahoo had a directory and Google had an index. And you might say, you know what, going to authoritative sources seems very obvious. But then you start to realize authoritative sources fail at like controversial topics. And you end up with having a complexity of how do I handle trace sources of information? Like Shree's blog might have information about your problem, but do I trust it or do I not trust it? Then you start going into how to rate quality. And then you start thinking about recency. And it's a very complicated question to actually identify a North Star metric for a search result. In general, when you have a product why that you've identified, identifying a key metric for it should actually be controversial. It should take you a lot of discussion. And it should be a lot of debates about trade-offs. If you end up with a really easy metric, I'd argue that you haven't done a good job actually getting to a real question or a hard problem. So an example from the real world is I work in the ads team. And if I just wanted to maximize money, I would put ads on every page everywhere. But that doesn't help with user happiness. So how do you make the right trade-off between good quality results, ads that are sensible and relevant, and that generate income for the advertiser and for Google? And making that trade-off is super difficult. And identifying the North Star metric especially is really hard. So I think this is something that you have to identify, you have to articulate. And, you know, I've talked to friends in the gaming industry, in streaming, in retail. And this is the hardest question for any product manager is can I understand my company's and my business's North Star metric and translate that to a North Star metric that I can actually get to? And the second question here, which is very hard, is can you even measure this? There's a famous decade and a half where Bain Consulting put out a whole bunch of material about this concept called Net Promoter Score, which is your North Star metric for most businesses, saying, would you refer this company to another business if they ask them for, what's your favorite database software? What is your favorite cloud company? And so NPS is one of those that's historically been a very hard and complicated North Star metric. But how do you even ask this question? Do you ask people who love your product? Do you ask a random sample? How do you define the universe you measure? So defining a metric and then measuring it are both extremely hard, and don't be baffled by it, embrace it, because that actually is a sign that you're onto something that means a valuable metric that will actually guide your business and your overall long-term plans. But then you get into what do I actually measure every day? Like I can't measure like my next product launch for my little app or feature where I'm building one small thing and say, how is this going to impact Net Promoter Score or your other proxy metrics? So then you say, let's find a proxy metric. What's a proxy metric? Let's talk about this for a second. Proxy metrics are measurable solves that are a hack to get at the hard metric that you described in the previous page. What does this mean? So if you're a marketer and, you know, in advertising, Google is serving marketers. So if you run a small business and you're trying to spend money on ads, I could argue that my metric is spend money only on valuable users who might convert and spend money with my business. So I could come with a proxy basically saying, let's measure the amount I spent on ads and measure and get high returns for the people who come to my store and then optimize for return on ad spend. This is something a lot of marketers do. But what happens is that you might get a lot of people who are already about to walk into your door. So sending them an ad was not needed to get them to convert. But if you only optimize your ROAS and put your blinders on and looked at that, you might end up making the wrong choice. Let's go to another metric that in the team I used to work on, which is on the Google support team. Support team's goal is to have support requests answered quickly with high quality results. Seems simple. You're like, what should my metric be? You're like, number of automated responses with high satisfaction. This is great, but you know what you just end up doing? You've just incentivized the product team to not fix the problems. Because if they fix the easy problems that are now automated support requests, all your support metrics go up because you've fixed the easy stuff and now only the hard problems come to your support team. So how do you actually think about this? I think this is extremely hard, and defining a proxy metric that is sensible but doesn't incentivize bad behavior is difficult. And not only is it difficult, I think it calls to question a lot of debate for you about how do you define and think about proxy metrics. I'm curious if anyone listening has thought about this problem before and how they've grappled with this, because it's something that is a never-ending problem. I don't think you can be like, I solved proxy metrics, I'm moving on to the next problem. I think this is a continuous problem. And sometimes you'll come to a product launch where you're like, I want to launch this feature, and you realize your list of proxy metrics doesn't give you intelligent decision-making criteria to decide if I should launch or not launch. Then I would stop and say, let's redefine my proxy metric. What is a better metric to help guide me so that I can make this decision in an intelligent way? Or if I don't have a proxy metric, you engage your cross-functional teams and you say, what would be a good way to measure this launch? And decide if this was a good investment of my engineering and my product team. Now let's kind of think about it a little bit more. Now, how do you start to make decisions with metrics? This is actioning, right? You've done all this work, you've come up with your outcome metrics and your North Star, you've got some proxy metrics. How do you actually start using this every day? I think making key decisions with proxy metrics and checking in on your North Star is difficult. And I think when you start to action this is when you're making launch decisions, when you're making product feature decisions, and when you're making go-to-market decisions. Let's think about this in real life, right? I work in ads measurement, and one metric that we think about a lot is how many advertisers can even get measurement. So for example, if you have seen products at Google, they might have measurement available to some advertisers, but not all of them. So a key metric I think about all the time is what's the coverage of advertisers that are able to receive measurement. But that is hard because sometimes small advertisers don't get measurement solutions. And if I have blinders on and only look at the coverage, I would just launch to everybody, no matter the quality of measurement, and just give them an answer. But the answer might be misleading because you have 10 ads and 1 conversion. Therefore, I can tell them the ad worked or didn't work. But that doesn't really give you enough information. You might want to run 1,000 ads across 100 conversions and learn which types of targeting, which types of users are useful for your business. So at very small numbers or small n, you might not have good measurement. But if I incentivize you to only give measurement to the best people, you might give measurement to 3 out of 1 million advertisers. And that's not a useful product. So how do you actually convert this and make a decision as a product? So one of the products we worked on, we ended up actually deciding to show eligibility in a transparent way to the advertiser. We said, you know what? Once you have enough conversions and ad spend, we'll give you measurement, but till then you're flying blind, and we're sorry for this, but let me explain why. Now, doing this was useful in the product, but it also changed how we did our incentives, right? I didn't want the sales teams and everyone actioning on measurement because giving them 100% target is misleading because I don't have measurement for 100% of our advertisers. So we switched this to say, okay, let's convert this into having an organizational goal that is not 100% coverage, but something that's more reasonable for people who are eligible. And then together, Google, the advertisers, can recognize when they become eligible or not eligible for making these metrics available for them. And so this is what becomes an actioning metric, right? How do you make your metric into something you use in your day-to-day life and use to guide product decision-making? Now, one thing I'll call out here, which is very honest, is that North Star metrics are very hard to measure in months and weeks and years even sometimes. So sometimes your small product feature might not actually be easy for you to influence and make a decision on because you need more information. So as an example, if I'm deciding whether to launch a feature that expands my advertising measurement from one YouTube format to another YouTube format, I don't know if that's going to make advertisers happier in the long term because it's very hard to articulate that impact. So then you start saying, what do you measure for every launch? And Google and several companies have what they call your standard launch metrics, which is a basket of probably sometimes 20 to 30 metrics that you track for every product or feature launch. And so firstly, you build a hypothesis of the impact on each metric and whether they're going to be touched or not, or if it's going to be touched, what your expectation is. Then you run a staged experiment for a few launches and go through from 0 to 1% to 10% to 50% to 100% and track these basket of metrics with alerting for your entire team, product, engineering, sales. So you all are educated on what is this doing to your advertisers? Is this a risk, or to your users, to your search queries? Is this actually impacting it positively or negatively? So as a specific example, we measure and track revenue, quality, latency, and look at all of these when your product launches. So if you launch something that you thought was going to make like your measurement more sophisticated and more accurate, but it slowed down the advertiser's experience of using our products, that's a problem. If users are getting lower quality ads, but revenue is going up, that's a trade-off that you might not be happy with. You have to reevaluate your launch. And designing your infrastructure of metrics so it guides your decisions is really important, because it's very easy to do what we call post-hoc analysis, right? You might stop and say, you know what, it launched, let's review all the numbers after and make sure it feels good, and I can put it into my performance review that I did a great job. But that is misleading, because you haven't looked at the null case of not doing anything. So doing a phased launch and comparing your launched users versus your unlaunched users and comparing their performance and A/B testing continuously and rigorously is extremely difficult but necessary. And this will guide you towards your North Star metrics. So just to kind of reiterate, North Star and ongoing are different and are important to be differentiated. I think I see a lot of press and material about how to find a North Star metric, but I think understanding these ongoing metrics is actually harder and more difficult, because you can't decide every day whether to launch or unlaunch a feature with your North Star metrics. And so identifying these ongoing metrics will give you much more clarity and also much more rigor in how you think about decisions. Now, how do you realize, if you look back at your org, you've tried to make measurement more relevant as a PM for yourself and also for your organization? How do you know it's working? I'd say point one is, can anyone in your org know your key metrics, right? Do they know your North Star metric, and do they know your current proxy metrics that matter? Do they actually think or decide with them or without them? So if you go to launch reviews and you're not in the room, or you're like a listener, are the UX researchers, or your engineers, are your salespeople, are they thinking about impact to your core metrics? And is this coming into your language in everyday life? Does this form a part of cross-functional discussions? You can, as a PM and a PM leader, talk about your metrics all the time, but if other teams and other partner organizations should be embracing this and realize that this is how we make decisions. So if someone has a proposal to come to you with an idea, they should be like thinking about, how does this fit into my metrics, and how do I present this correctly to the organization so that they all buy into it, understand its value, understand my hypothesis and its impact on our core metrics. If this is not happening, then it's okay. It's a culture change and it takes time to get there. And you have to find a path to go from interest, involvement, engaged, to actively using them, right? And I think you have to take people as a PM on the journey with you to start making these metrics part of their day-to-day life. In 0 to 1 projects, especially, metrics are very hard. If you're going from like a category that didn't exist to like establishing a new product in a category, you might find that metrics are really hard for ongoing measurement because you have no universe, you have no user understanding. But the metrics are still very important because it defines your investment decision. Your go or no-go should be based on hypotheses and metrics that you measure episodically and confirm that your decision was valid or invalid. If you're not able to do this, I would suggest finding a better metric or engaging back with your own team and your peer set or maybe some mentors to find a way to measure a metric for your launches. Now, let's talk about a real world example, right? Like this sounds very fictitious and seems idealistic. Let's say your data team at your company, in my case YouTube, found that there's 1 million users who are paying for YouTube Premium but are not consuming anything from the premium channels. And you're wondering what to do. This is a very common sort of case question, and people start diving into, well, you know, I'll send them an email saying that they've been paying and not using it and give them a refund. Or they might be like, let's be like a gym, and post December to March, everyone pays and never uses the gym, right? Like we know this is what New Year's resolutions are all about. So what do you do? And a lot of people jump into what I call like ideation mode and saying, this is what I think about, these are some ideas, and I'm going to implement one of them. But actually, this is a metrics question. We just don't realize it. Because the metrics question is, if I'm a YouTube PM, what are the problems that are worth me engaging and thinking about? Is this in my 90% of things that are core to my business, or my fringe 10% that are not that important? So I would first kind of think about this problem as saying, is this worth me thinking about? What percentage of my users? In this case, if it's a few million, it's significant, right? And if it's in the US, which has, call it 100 million, then you might be like, okay, it's worth engaging on and thinking about what percent of my users are impacted. It might be what percent of my revenue is impacted. It might be, is there a brand or PR risk? But I need to have a framework to think about, is this worth me thinking about this problem? That's sort of your metric one, is like, do I engage? The second metric is, what are my goals as a PM on YouTube, right? Is there a North Star metric? And what is this problem going to unearth as an impact to my North Star metric? Then you kind of actually start thinking about this, okay, what are my proxy metrics I'm measuring on a day-to-day basis that would be impacted by this problem that we unearthed? And what are my solutions that I end up thinking about and designing, and how do they impact my proxy metrics? So you convert a PM general product problem statement and a product strategy question into a metrics analysis to identify how I think about decisions. And then you go back to your ideation and your brainstorm, and you might say, okay, idea one, do nothing. Idea two, write to the users and refund them their money. Idea three, send notifications and recommendations of content they could consume that they might like. Recommendation four might be learn why they're not consuming. Maybe their device got unlisted by YouTube and they're not supported. Idea five, it might be like a certain manufacturer or a device or a browser that's not supported. And now suddenly we're like not able to give them the content they want. So it could be a technical issue. It could be a content issue. It might be that we had a bunch of videos in a certain language that just seemed to have not served, or that creators stopped serving, or a country blocked YouTube. And that's why we're missing out on a lot of this content consumption. But I think all these come downstream from your metrics analysis, right? If you don't understand your North Star metric and its impact, you're not able to dimensionalize all your ideas. Once you've dimensionalized your ideas and size them, you can then go through the expansive and the contractive phase of ideation, sizing, building a trade-off matrix, making an action plan or a decision, and then starting to think about what an MVP or a quick test might be to prove if your idea is good or bad. But going through that entire process, you have to have your lens of your PM metrics and how you think about this problem and how it impacts your everyday decisions. Just as an example, this actually is a real problem that Netflix actually had, and they just in May announced a policy where they were refunding people who've paid for Netflix and not used it in a recent past. And so this is a very real world challenge, but it's a metrics driven decision that also involves your company strategy, your ethics, and your user base, but it has to start with understanding its impact on your daily business. I'd say this example, and I'm open to hearing more about other people who've had to deal with tough situations. And the question is, how do you actually approach and think about problems? It's a non-trivial case that you have an easy metric and you can make all your decisions and life is simple. In reality, it's very complicated. And identifying a metric that is useful to come up with decisions is very, very crucial. And often every decision is a trade-off. There's no uncontroversial decisions, because if not, they wouldn't have you in your job. They would have an algorithm do your job. And this is why you end up having to have to think about these trade-offs and then make a value judgment or a ethical / company strategy and mission-based judgment after listening to what the data tells you. So, as you zoom back out and think about this, I would say, think a lot about what is a meaningful outcome metric. Think about how you find them. Think about how you design them. Think about whether they're actually meaningful retrospectively. You can come up with a North Star metric, but if you haven't made any decisions using that North Star metric to guide whether your company is doing well or not, or your product is doing well or not, or whether you should keep or kill a product, then those outcome metrics are not meaningful. Sundar historically has always talked about this idea that Larry and Sergey talk about, which is the toothbrush test. A product that Google is involved in usually is used twice a day. It's very simple, sounds very basic, but that is a very meaningful outcome metric for a high quality product that has value to a lot of users. Now, how does that translate to my day-to-day product decisions? It doesn't. But it converts to proxy metrics that are more meaningful on a day-to-day basis. And how do you convert them and use them? And that becomes very meaningful. How do you get realistic on proxy metrics? I think, we talked a little bit about some examples, but proxy metrics are just what they are. And the word proxy is key. Keep double checking if your proxy metric takes you away from your product goals and your actual meaningful user needs. Proxy metrics are a hack. They're useful. They're very meaningful to make decisions, but they're a risk that you have to be watching out for so you don't end up going away from what your user base actually wants. I would say you should also use launch metrics for every launch or feature. Think about that basket of metrics you analyze for every launch, and think about how they are consistently helping you evolve your decision-making and helping you revert if you're finding something not going in sync with what you expect. I think also having critical reflection on metrics choices is really important. Metrics aren't a set it and forget it game, because even your choice of metrics should evolve over time. And if previously you just had user growth as a goal and then you reached a critical user base, then you got to think about engagement, happiness, and retention. And at the same time, growth remains an important facet, but it's important, like as your product evolves in its maturity, your metrics have to evolve as well. And finally, don't be fussed if your outcomes are not in sync with your metrics. Sometimes you might have the right metrics design and the choices, but your product doesn't have product market fit. Or your users or your advertisers behave differently, and you have to go learn. You need to then have a learning loop, and we talked about it on our first slide, and then revise your metrics choice. Maybe you need to find a different set of metrics that make more sense. And finally, don't forget, information is beautiful. Think about why and how this becomes meaningful to your life. It's not just metrics for the sake of it. It's more about metrics that help you make decisions and hopefully helps you get out and feel comfortable in your decisions and why you make them. I think that's kind of very important for you to think about. It's like, hey, these are in your toolkit as a PM to help you be a better PM and help your organization understand you and your decisions a lot better. Awesome. Thanks a lot for coming and joining me on this journey to hear about measurement for PMs. I found it really fun to actually think and engage with what would be useful to an audience of listeners and give them a little bit of what I picked up along the way. I'd love your feedback, comments, any ideas you have, or if you want to collaborate on something together again. My Twitter is @Shreenath, my first name, and I'd love to continue to help the product community because I learned a lot from the interwebs of the world to help me make my transition to product and grow as a product manager. And I want to be part of the journey and help give back and be part of everyone else's journey as well. So good luck and thanks for joining.